Hi there, and welcome to the C10 podcast, where we mainly talk about leadership and mentoring in 10 questions with changemakers, mostly with ties to the Kansas City area. This is all part of the C of the Major Leagues Foundation, and specifically a tie-in to our C10 mentoring and leadership program. I'm Matt Folks, Executive Director of C of the Major Leagues and usual host of this podcast. I'm honored that you've chosen to listen this week. Thank you so much. Now, let's get into this week's conversation. This is episode 148 of the C10 podcast, and this week we're going to be chatting with our old friend Toby Cook, who's one of a handful of people in the world with this particular distinction. That distinction, this is his third appearance on this C10 podcast. Hey, speaking of the number 3, this is a horrible segue, kind of like my last time I tried to do this. Our third annual C You At Topgolf event is in about 3 months on Thursday night, May 23rd in Topgolf in Overland Park. If you'd like to support students and have a blast with friends, coworkers, family, just some random folks you invite off the street, please visit ceyouattopgolf.com for more details. And I'm pretty sure we'll be talking more about that event during this chat with Toby Cook. So now on to Toby Cook. If you're a longtime Kansas Citian, you likely recognize the name Toby Cook. You've seen him at some point on TV. It could be during his time as an anchor, which he spent 8 years at Fox 4 here in Kansas City. That's where he and I first met about 25 years ago, about 1999, I think it was. And then our paths continued to cross in his next job, as he spent more than 14 years with the Kansas City Royals as Vice President of Publicity. And then in the spring of 2021, he had a job pivot in his early 50s when he left the Royals and became the Director of Public Relations for the University of Kansas Health Systems. So we're going to be talking about that, and why we'll be talking about Topgolf. Well, Toby is the chair of our committee for that fundraiser, so we'll chat about that here in just a couple moments. But with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you for a third time to Toby Cook. Welcome to the C of the Major League Shed, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing great. When somebody brings something like that up, if you're crazy people like you and I, we start thinking about, oh, that reminds me of. And I remember when Steve Martin hosted Saturday Night Live for the 5th time, there was a skit that opened the show, and he walked into some lounge and there were 2 or 3 other people that had hosted it for the 5th time. And it was this secret lounge that they had at Saturday Night Live only for 5-timers. So I'm in the 3-timer on this podcast, and we need to create a lounge for all of us to hang out, right?
And you know what? I've got to think through it. You may just be one of, we've had, Dayton has been on numerous times, of course. Yeah. And, Max has been on in various roles, Max Utzler, and then your old friend, coworker, Al Wallace has been on a few times, but not necessarily as a guest as much as, he's co-hosted a few times. So it's, you and Dayton might be the only 2 that we've interviewed more than twice.
That's cool. That I just noticed, you've got a great background behind you with all the books that you either have written or read, or both or neither. But over in my right-hand corner, over your left shoulder, is your Buck O'Neil legacy seat. And yes. I had the pleasure of being an integral part of that. The 2 things that I kind of take away from my Royals time was Royals Fan Fest, and I was on the ground floor of that, and then the Buck O'Neil legacy seat. And Buck died he died in the last month of my very first season at the Royals, and we started the Buck seat the next year. And the interesting thing about that is that we went out of our way not to repeat. We ended up with like 1,300. Well, it was more like 1,000. I remember the number 1,066 Buck seat people before I left. And we never had a repeat except one pastor in town whom we just flat out forgot that he had sat in it before. So that wasn't a very good excuse. The other one, of course, was Bob Kendrick, who was very appropriate. So, yeah, it's that's a good distinction to be in, and I'm glad to be with you today.
Yeah, it's and I keep that plaque there because it's it's a reminder of, for me, it's a reminder of, our board members, committee members, people like you that have helped support See You in the Major Leagues, and especially our students and mentors. And
Mhm.
it's just, the cool thing about that night, and you get one, two, three, what, maybe five seats. You can bring four
Got
guests,
five
I think it
seats.
was.
Yeah, four guests.
And for us at the time, for Libby and me, our kids, only one was in town for whatever reason. Only one was in town. I think one was living in another state, and one was at a church camp or something when this happened. And so it was my wife and our middle son, or our middle child, oldest son, and then two of the students who had graduated from the C10 mentoring leadership program were able to join.
Perfect.
And
Yeah, that's
and
perfect.
it was such a fun night. And we had, it was a night when our students were recognized on the field for their accomplishments in C10 and in the classroom. And it was just, I mean, it's giving me chills thinking
Yeah.
about it. I mean, it was just such a fun night. I was incredibly uncomfortable, and I don't know if you knew that people were like this, but I was incredibly uncomfortable with the camera sitting there during that shot, because it's just
Yes.
a close up while Mike McCartney's reading your bio, and that was incredibly uncomfortable. But outside of that, it was, I mean, it just gives me chills thinking about it.
And you must have gotten tons of texts saying, "Hey, did you know that you're on TV?"
Yeah.
Because in between the top of the third and the bottom of the third, our friends at Fox Sports Kansas City would show the buck seat recipient. And that was cool.
It was cool. And yeah, I mean, I got a ton of texts. I will tell you one, and this is not, this is not a name drop thing, but it kind of tells you what type of person he is. But one of the coolest texts I got was from former longtime major league player, played 16 years, Reggie Sanders,
Mm-hmm.
who, at the, finished his career. I think he finished his career at the Royals, played
Yeah.
toward the end of his career at the Royals, and then went to work in the baseball operations department under Dayton Moore. And I think he's still with the Royals now, but Reggie is just such an incredible guy. We've had him on Zoom with our C10 students. He's been on this podcast. But he sent me a screenshot of of me being on TV, and just a really sweet text. And so it was fun to get that. But no, I applaud you, because it's such a cool piece of what the Royals do.
Yep.
And if they end up moving to a new stadium, and I know there was, I think, now if I'm wrong, tell me, but did you guys started this before the renovations, didn't you? Before the original renovations?
Yes, we did it in 2007. So Buck died heading into the off season of 2006 into seven. And our first Buck O'Neill legacy seat was opening day 2007. The first the debut of Alex Gordon's game.
Oh, wow.
We beat the Boston Red Sox that game. It was my first opening day as a member of the Royals front office. And Buck's younger brother, who was only 92, threw out the first pitch that game. So,
Oh, that's awesome. But if I remember correctly, that was the significance of that seat, was that was where Buck sat.
that's correct.
And
It
obviously he
was
got
right.
moved a little bit with the renovations, but
Yeah, it was right around the area where he sat and scouted games, and it was the only red seat. So we had 40,000 blue seats in the stadium, but the one red seat for the KC Monarchs was the Buck seat.
that's awesome. Now, I do hope that if and when they move, that the new stadium has a red seat in it.
Me
So.
too.
Well, we do have a lot to chat about here in the next few minutes, but so let me do this, because normally we start these with pregame batting practice, and we're gonna do that today. But since this would be your third attempt at it, and I mean, you knocked it out of the park the first two times, so we're gonna tweak it a little bit. And I've never done this, so we'll see how it goes. But we are going to we're gonna do a Billy Joel version of pregame
Wow.
batting
Okay.
practice. And for those of you who don't know, Toby is a big Billy Joel fan.
Hmm.
And so here we go. Question number one. I'm a huge Billy Joel fan because.
In 1980, the year that George Brett was flirting with 400 and the Royals were running away with the American League West, I bought my first album, and it was Billy Joel's Glass Houses. And I had no idea how big of a deal he would become in my life, but that was my very first album. And then I saw him live 7 years later for my very first concert.
Nice. So did you see him here?
I saw him at Kemper Arena
Yeah.
for the Bridge Tour. He had
Yeah.
done the Greatest Hits Volumes 1 and 2 back in 1985. And that was really how I got to know all of his old songs. And then I went back and bought all of the old stuff too. But he had a couple of singles from that 1985 Greatest Hits album. And then he came out with The Bridge a year later. And I saw him at Kemper Arena by 1987.
Yep. I was there. If I could listen to only one Billy Joel album for the rest of my life, it would be
his live album from Madison Square Garden in 2000. It was called the Millennial Concert. And it's an impossible answer to give because it would drive me nuts. But that album has all of his hits and a couple of random songs that he does live. And he was in great voice that night. It was Y2K.
Oh.
And he did the concert at Madison Square Garden. And he said that he almost lost track of time and looked up and there were like 8 seconds left before midnight when he was wrapping up a song, but they got to midnight and were able to celebrate. But he does a version of My Life on that album that is basically my favorite Billy Joel recording. He even messes up a couple of times, and it's just so that would be the one I would pick.
So, I mean, speaking of live, how many times have you seen him live?
10 times.
Oh.
And the 10th time was when he was live at Kauffman Stadium in 2018, which was kind of a full circle, both of my worlds colliding type of thing. But we had not hosted a rock concert. We had not hosted a rock concert in 39 years.
Yeah.
And it was 1979, the last time that Kauffman Stadium then Royal Stadium had a concert. And he had gone on this stadiums tour, this baseball and football stadiums tour. And he just happened to be the first one that we booked. And then they've done some concerts since then. But that was the 10th time I saw him. And I did get to say hello to him that night and got a picture.
Oh, nice.
But the Joel 18 jersey, where we made up a jersey for him, that hung in my office for a couple of days. So that was really, really a fun moment.
That's awesome. Okay, question number 3. I think his new song, Turn the Lights Back On, is
fantastic. And what a relief. So I'm on this page, this Billy Joel page, where there was hints that he had dropped that he was coming out with new material at one of his concerts. And then I started hearing that it could happen soon. And then I read that it was being dropped. It was going to, that's what they call it these days, Matt. It's dropped.
I know.
It didn't show up on the radio first or in a record store. Anyway, I got it the night and I listened to it my first time through, and I was so relieved because he sounded great. And I'll tell you this, I've been a big enough of a Billy Joel fan that I can now start picking at him about some of the stuff that I didn't like about this song. He released a song 17 years ago called All My Life. And it was the first and only thing that he had done since his last studio album in 1993. And it wasn't very good. It just breaks my heart. He didn't sound good. The song itself was beautiful, but he just didn't sound in good voice. And I was just really, really happy that he not only did that, but he was kind of the star of the show at the Grammys a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
They timed those all so that you can maximize sales, but he was good on the Grammys. And it was just nice to hear a new Billy Joel song that was decent.
So I watched part of the Grammys just for that reason. I mean, I don't typically watch them, but knowing that he was going to be on.
Yeah. And of course they left it to the end. So I'm like, I want to go to bed.
Exactly. All right. So you've met him, but question number 4, if I could have lunch with Billy Joel today, I'd want him to know.
The first thought is I want him to know how much he has meant to our family. I mean, I don't put rock stars and athletes on a pedestal anymore. I used to, But Dayton Moore would be the first person to say that there are plenty of people out in the world that are hero level, and rock stars and athletes aren't always that. But, he literally has been the soundtrack of our house. I mean, we've listened to him all the time. My kids know every word of every song. So that would be fun to tell him. But I'd also be so shy about it because I know that they hear this sort of all the time. And I would hope that my follow up would be something that he'd actually be interested in. A very quick story. I worked and worked and worked to arrange a backstage interview with him back in 1996 when I was in Lynchburg, Virginia, working in the ABC affiliate, and he was coming to Washington, D.C. And he was on a tour of colleges and universities, and it was a night with Billy Joel, where he would come out on stage, and it was a small crowd. And he would come out on stage and he would play for a while, and then he would talk about how these songs came to him or the process of writing. It was a very special thing. It wasn't a concert, so to speak. So I knew that I had a shot at possibly scoring something. And I mean, I worked and worked and worked at it. And somehow we convinced his assistant producer, his traveling person, to let us have 5 minutes with him back behind stage. So I got to interview him back in 1996. It ended up being a 13-minute interview. The best part of the interview, the thing I loved the most, was that my camera operator had to go fix a light. So we weren't rolling necessarily. It wasn't a part of the interview. And I just asked him a question like one guy to another, which was, so do you spend the night or do you just fly in and fly back? And he said, nah, we bust down and then we bust back. I'll be in bed tonight at my home. That was the best part of the experience because I just had a 5-second conversation with Billy Joel as a guy. And then we went back into interview mode.
I'm assuming you still have that on at least VHS or something.
I have it on 3/4 tape.
Oh.
That I do have it on VHS, but it's in a box somewhere.
Nice. All right. Well, that was fun. But so how are things at University of Kansas Health System?
They're very good. We've been extremely busy. So the number one goal, obviously, at a health system is to make people better, save lives, make them healthier. But my role as director of public relations often swerves more into what the health system's role is in the community. So we're a $6 billion operation annually when it comes to economic development that we create all throughout Kansas City and the state of Kansas. I heard a stat once that 27% of all people who work in healthcare in Kansas work at our place. We're up to almost 20,000 people. And part of the big busyness is that we acquired Olathe Health. And so they're now a part of the University of Kansas Health System. And we're in the process of what they call due diligence to see if Liberty Hospital is going to become a part of our family. And we also are building a new cancer center on our 39th and Rainbow campus, which will probably be the biggest thing that we've ever done. But with those things, it's big. But I spend a lot of time working on Treads and Threads, which is our fundraiser that we do every year out at the Kansas Speedway. We have a Hall of Fame dinner where we honor people who have been champions of the health system. I said it last time and I'll say it again. They haven't let me near a patient once. But I do love hospitals and the hospital vibe, and they have let me near a patient once, but not for any clinical reason. But I'm fascinated with the people, the doctors and the nurses and others that take care of folks here.
Most of us will face some type of health challenge at some point. And when you start to look at what nurses go through, the knowledge they have to have, and then of course doctors, I mean, it's really pretty incredible, isn't it?
It's incredible. And I get most of my energy from what they do. You and I knew a guy named Neil Harwell here in town he worked for the Royals for a while. And he used to say to me, I'm in the sponsorship business. I'm putting signs of Budweiser and Chevrolet and other then Sprint, now T-Mobile up on the boards, but I just get my energy from the baseball guys and them putting on a team every day and all of that. And that's where I get my energy from, the unbelievably professional doctors and nurses and caregivers at the health system. And, what it has taught me is that there is great joy. Not everybody's wired this way, so I completely get that somebody else gets their joy from something else. But there's great joy for some of us in playing a tiny little part in making somebody's life just a little bit better that day.
Mhm.
And when you go into a patient room, the look on their face, the feeling of vulnerability that they're counting on somebody else rather than their own ability to get up and heal themselves, it's wonderful to see somebody give comfort in that environment and a little bit of hope because they're really, really good at what they do.
Yeah.
This is J.R. Buckner, President and CEO of First Federal Bank of Kansas City. We hope you're enjoying this week's conversation. For this week's Student Spotlight, I'd like you to meet one of the students in our C10 Mentoring and Leadership Program.
My name is John Wilson. I go to Lincoln College Preparatory Academy, and C10 has made an impact on my life because I had to learn how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I am a talker, but at the same time, if I don't really know anybody, then I kind of get quiet. But C10 has taught me it doesn't matter who you are as a person, just speak up because, you might learn something from somebody else if you speak up.
First Federal Bank of Kansas City is proud to make a donation this week to the Post-High School Scholarship Fund for seniors in the C10 Mentoring and Leadership Program. If you'd like to join us in this effort to give our future leaders an opportunity after high school, please click on the link in the show's notes. Now back to this week's conversation.
Just from a PR standpoint, what is most challenging about the job and just kind of what you do on a regular basis?
I may have talked about this in our last visit, but in my jobs before, a lot of what I did was day of or week of. So I would get an assignment or knew what I was doing, and I would execute it very quickly. In TV, it was that way every day because you were doing the news. So you were covering the news and you had to get it on the air that night, and then you came back and did the same thing the next day. With the Royals, it was more, I would say, kind of weekly. The team would come into town. We would have to execute 7 to 10 days worth of baseball games. We were putting a show on every night for anywhere from 15,000 to 40,000 people. With healthcare in the PR world, it's a lot more strategic. And that means that it's collaborative. That means that you work with a lot of people. A guy with ants in his pants who has no patience has to learn that lesson. And so that's what I did for the first year and a half, is to try to figure out how to not diminish my energy level. I work better under pressure. I work better with deadline pressure. But in that scenario, you have to learn to kind of stretch things out a little bit. And, that arrangement can get a bad rap sometimes because you'll be like, oh, we have so many meetings and we have so many approvals, but we're dealing with some pretty serious stuff. And I learned fairly early on that in baseball, 90% of what I worked on was just fun in baseball. With this can be life or death, or it can put the health system in a legal bind, or in our case, in a statutory bind. And what I mean by that is we exist because the Kansas legislature 25 years ago created us as an independent authority. And then we went off and we did our own thing. We don't get any state tax dollars from the state. Kansas, the legislature doesn't really get in our business much, but the governor is the one who approves our board of directors. We nominate them and the governor has to sign off on it. And that act 25 years ago could be reversed. If for some reason down the road, the legislature decides that they want to take us back over, theoretically they could. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think there's one legislator that wants that. But, so in working with that, I have to go to the lawyers a little bit more than I ever had to in baseball when we're doing communications, protecting people's privacy. The rules around all of that are, stringent. So that's been the hardest thing for me to get used to. And there is one other thing. which is that sometimes bad things happen in a hospital. Much, much, much more often than not, it's not because of anything that a caregiver did. It's because it's an unfortunate situation. People die, people are sick, they don't respond to treatment. That's a lousy part. But, in some ways you have to just kind of chalk that up to, thank God we're here to take care of people, because life is going to happen.
Yeah. So in this week's show notes, we'll put a link to your previous two interviews, and we talk in those a little bit more at length about leaving the Royals, the transition, looking for a job, that sort of thing. But there's so many people today that are looking for jobs. So before we talk about Topgolf and get set to wrap this up, what would be one or two pieces of advice that if somebody's listening and maybe they're in their late 40s to mid 50s, or maybe even the late 50s, and they're looking for something new, what would be your advice?
One, if you haven't learned to network, learn to network, because I had not learned to network before I was in the job market. And what I mean by that is I had a ton of contacts. I had people in my phone. I still have just a lot of people in my phone, but a lot of my work related connections were transactional. As a reporter, it happened as a guy with the Royals, where people were contacting me. But when I was reaching out to people, I realized, well, this isn't going to work for me to just call and say, hey, can you help me? Blah, blah, blah. I needed to get to know them a little bit. And what I found out was having coffee with somebody for no other reason than just getting to know them and telling them, oh, as an aside, I'm looking for this type of position. If you hear of anything, will you let me know? That creates this kind of exponential expansion of your network, where they'll give you a couple of people, especially in Kansas City. Everyone is willing to help. And those two people will often give you two people more, and you'll start. And I've been told time and again that that's really the best way to find a job. The job boards and the LinkedIn options, they're only going to get you so far. It's really, really easy to just get lost in the shuffle. But I found that to be the case. The other thing that I have only recently realized is that at some point or another, you're going to want to give yourself a little bit of time and permission to process what has happened to you. And I don't know the details of how you process it. All I know is that 2 times in my life, I have had fairly jolting experiences happen, and I just took off and went on to the next thing. And it wasn't until a year, 2, 3 years later, I still have these unprocessed feelings. And I would give that as personal advice, that it's okay to maybe mourn the change, even if it was a change that you wanted or you thought you wanted, because these transitions are not as easy. It's not as easy as when we were young and we were just bouncing from one thing to the next.
Right.
You get a little bit older and you start to develop kind of an understanding of how the world works and our relationships. Leaving something is a little bit more traumatic than your survival brain will let you think about. My idea was, okay, up to the next thing, let's go. And it wasn't until later that somebody pointed out to me that I never really mourned the loss of what I had before, and that sort of clears the cobwebs to, what's to come.
Yep. Well, as we come down to our final few minutes here, I do want to talk about C You At Topgolf, our 3rd annual event. It's a fundraiser to support students and mentors in the C10 Mentoring Leadership Program. And it's coming up on May 23rd. I often have to think through the numbers in my head. 5/23/24 is what it comes down to. So
Very
Thursday
good.
night, May 23rd. It's the Thursday night before Memorial Day, which is the same time we had it last year. We've been able to sell it out the first 2 years, but I am just so tickled, Toby, that you are joining us on the committee as our committee chair. Max Utzler did an outstanding job of getting this event off the ground, and Max has Max at the point has retired from teaching, and now he's kind of going back and helping our old friend Al Wallace. And so his schedule is just crazy, and he's doing some other things with our C10 students. And so we reached out to you and were able to twist your arm, but I'm so thankful for that. I mean, you were able to go to the event last year.
Yep.
As you think to as we record this, these next 11 weeks, just what would you tell somebody who's thinking, hey, I might want to be a part of this?
I used to say this about the Urban Youth Academy, which Dayton was very, very important to him. And I've said it about Dayton's foundation, See You in the Major Leagues, that's really one of the best sports related things that we've got going on in Kansas City. The focus isn't necessarily on sports. It's just that's kind of, that's sort of the theme of the people that are involved. People love sports and they love the sportscasters in town, and they love the, who are going to be at this event. They love the athletes, both current and former. But there's nothing better than people who are giving back to young folks who just need some wisdom, because, life has not allowed them to have this perspective that other people have. And so these mentors that the C10 program has created in these relationships are just invaluable. I think it makes Kansas City a better city. So but it's also, it's the gateway to summer, and it's Topgolf, and you're out there and having a blast. I think that anybody who has heard about it before, but has not had an opportunity to buy a bay, to sponsor a team, they're going to come away with what I saw last year. And then you and I have talked about this with Max. Really, their memory is not going to be of the celebrities that are coming by. That's a cool factor. Or even the fact that they're golfing, but that these young people that are involved, they get to hang with them, and they find out about them, and they find out about their siblings, and they find out something funny about when they were a kid. And, to make it possible for us to do that, we would be very, very grateful.
So it's CEOTopgolf.com. And I'll say this about the students. 2 years ago, when we first did this event, we actually did it in September. Our inaugural event was in September of 22. And it was great. It was sold out, but it was during the school year, and we had our high school students, which was great. We had a huge senior class, and they were able to walk people around and walk the celebrities around. They go bay to bay and meet people. Last year, it was late enough that a lot of our college students were able to be there, and that's the case this year. So that's why we've kind of moved it to May. But yeah, I mean, we've had companies, sponsors have come back to us and said, "Hey, I loved getting to know so-and-so student. We want to make sure we keep in touch with that student, or we want to help provide a scholarship for that student." So it's really cool to see that. And I will say this, sponsorship started at $3,000. That's a bay. That's for 6 people. You get a buffet meal. You can have an extra guest come with you, but you get a chance to meet the students, meet the celebrities. And that $3,000 sponsorship covers a student in the C10 program for a year. So you're basically giving a student a mentor, life and job skills, educational enhancements, a chance to hear from great leaders in our community, get to know great leaders in our community, and serve in our community with monthly service projects. So to be able to sponsor a team at $3,000, I mean, you're making a life-changing impact on somebody else, and you'll meet the students that you're directly impacting with your sponsorship. So it's a lot of fun, Toby, and I'm just so thankful that you're able to be a part of it.
Well, thanks. I'm looking forward to it. It should be a blast. You know what? In a couple of years, when you write that $3,000 check, you won't miss that $3,000. But that young person is never, ever going to forget that night.
And that gave me chills too. But hey, Toby, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for, all you're doing for our students and mentors, but all you do for our city through, I still want to call it KU Med, but what you do through the University of Kansas Health System. And helping to promote that and whatnot. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all that you do for our community. And, I'm going to take a wild guess and say we might try to get you on a 4th time at some point.
Okay. At some point, they're like, no, never again. Thank you, Matt.
Well, that does it for this episode of the C10 Mentoring and Leadership Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, we hope that you'll leave a favorable review on your favorite podcast platform. If you didn't enjoy it, or you have other comments or suggestions for potential guests, you can click on the comment link in the show's notes. We drop a new episode at the end of every week, but be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an interview. And if you or your company would like to help underwrite this podcast, let me know. Until next time, this is Matt Folks for the See You in the Major Leagues Foundation saying be safe and take care.